Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Maggie. It's yet another special daily time, and of course today we're commemorating Valentine's Day. Considering it's one of the biggest holidays I would say that we celebrate, at least in this part of the world, it's also suitable that exists in the game as well. To kind of commemorate that, we have the active item Friendly Ball, which is a very unique item, definitely, probably not the strongest, maybe not even that strong, but what it does allow you to do is capture enemies and then unleash them in different rooms and they fight for you. It's a very novel concept, and maybe it works well as maybe an insta-kill. If you really hate some enemies, you can just capture them and that essentially removes them from the room. Its secondary benefit is maybe not that good, because most of the charmed enemies, or at least most of the enemies which you capture, have contact damage, which means that they have to get close to the other enemies, and because their HPs are relatively low, they end up dying quite fast, so often this item is really not that useful. There's a whole challenge just revolved around using Friendly Ball, but sadly the item just doesn't work that well. I would say that maybe it would be a better idea if the charmed enemies had more HP, maybe they just had more sustainability. The biggest part, or maybe the biggest problem just with charm in general, I think, is that if you have the charm effect, the enemies actually need to get to the other enemies so you can actually capture them or that they can deal damage. But the time it takes for an enemy to get to another enemy is quite long in some cases, depending on, of course, where they are. But by that time, they're either already dead just because of how much HP they have, or the charm effect is already worn off. Of course, the Friendly Ball charm is permanent, so the effect doesn't really wear off. So you need to be quite selective about which items or which enemies you actually capture. Most enemies, like I said, are just end up being useless, but some enemies can actually be quite good. Wall crawlers are pretty decent because they usually stay on the walls and they're out of the reach out of other enemies, which means that they're not really likely to get hit. So wall crawlers with Brimstone are probably your best bet if you really want to use this item kind of competitively, just because Brimstone in general does deal a lot of damage, and when you kind of have the enemies somewhere where the other enemies can't reach them, that's always a positive. Maybe a second tier of enemies would be whenever you want to capture an enemy which has a form of a ranged attack, so some enemies which you really don't want to get in contact with other, you want to rely maybe on their ranges because they're able to shoot forward and not even get close to other enemies, so they can survive for longer. And maybe that's just wishful thinking, but it doesn't really turn out that well whenever you try to utilize the item in its full glory. It's a really neat concept. I just feel like maybe the stats would need to be rebalanced. Maybe, like I said, the HP would have to be higher for this item to be actually useful, but as it is now, sadly, it does fall flat on its face, and most often than not, you just end up replacing it for something better. In this case, we also had the charm tiers, and I think I said previously that charm is probably one of my favorite status effects in the game. And charm tiers is kind of, I think, strikes a balance between being useful and maybe not that useful, just depending on which room you're in. And when you can charm an enemy, and just it lasts, for a few seconds, but usually it's enough for the enemy just to get away from you. I think it's more of a defensive option than maybe an offensive option, because when you strike a charmed enemy, or maybe when you charm an enemy, they start running away from you towards other enemies. And if you have some form of AoE, that actually makes it much easier to shoot them because they're more clumped up together. So I think it's more of a defensive option, or maybe if you look at it as a defensive item instead of an offensive item, it has much more usability and maybe potential than it originally seems. Like I said previously, if you use it offensively, most often than not, the enemies will just end up either killing itself, or when they actually get to the other enemies, the charm effect is just gonna end up dissipating and nothing's even gonna happen. But besides that, it's a nice idea for a daily. I get it, what they were going for, of course, all the hearts, the charmed enemies and things like that. But they're really, what is more charming and loving than Mega Satan, a huge brimstone that we shoot out of our head? I think that it really is the essence of Valentine, just shooting huge brimstones out of your faces. And in this case, because we have the battery as well, that means that we can effectively hold 24 charges, which is probably the most you can ever hold of anything. And the fact we also had a sack of sacks, we also have some other items which allow us to have a bunch of consumables. We're just getting batteries left and right, and essentially we can just repeatedly use this item. And Mega Satan's Blast or Mega Blast, not Mega Satan's Blast, but I guess it's Mega Satan's Blast, it's Mega Satan's head, so it makes sense that it's Mega Satan's Blast. Nevertheless, it's Mega Blast, and I usually kind of harp on it because it's maybe not that good. You feel like it should be more useful than it is, but often, you just maybe clear a few rooms with it. A lot of the rooms don't even have enemies in them, which means you're just wasting your precious time. And even in boss rush, maybe the point where this item shines the most it ends up maybe killing 3 or 4 waves before it runs out, and then you have to kill 2 or 3 waves by yourself. And if you don't have a good run, that can be quite tedious, and oftentimes, you still miss Hush because of it. Thankfully, this run doesn't even have Hush, but even if it did, we had really the perfect combination of using Mega Blast, like I said previously, because we can hold 2 charges essentially. It means that even if we do overkill enemies in boss rush, it overcharges into the next charge, and then we can essentially use that to kill more enemies. And it's good because even in rooms, or maybe if you don't get a lot of rooms to explore, we can still use it and essentially have 1 full charge remaining for killing other enemies or maybe even a boss. What's great about it, that even if maybe we encounter a room which doesn't have any enemies and doesn't grant us a charge, there's still a chance that we're gonna get a sack from Sack of Sacks, and most often than not, they do contain the sacks, of course, contain a battery charge, and when they contain a battery charge, they give you 3 charges back. And on average, I would say, because you maybe do 6 rooms, I would say you get about 2 sacks out of them, and that's about 6 charges, and when you do 6 rooms, you get 6 additional charges. It means that you can keep using it indefinitely. So sure, there are some situations where maybe you don't really want to rely on Mega Satan's Blast that much, but really, it's a fun item to use. It comes up so rarely, and when you're actually able to utilize it, when you have the active items or the passive items to make the greatest use out of it, like in this daily, I think it's much more fun than just using it by itself. And like I said previously, if you just use it by itself, not by yourself. By itself, it's not that good, maybe not even that fun, not even that strong, but when you have the perfect items to kind of go along with it, I think it's a very engaging experience. So now that we kind of got through that, we beat the boss rush, it wasn't that big of a deal, we got the shovel, and there's always a decision to be made on dailies. Do I stick with a fun item, or do I take an item which will give me more score? I'm a score whore to some extent. I do like to perform well, even though I really would enjoy just using Mega Blast for the rest of the run. I felt I was satisfied enough that I was able to give it up and just picked up the shovel to get an additional floor of bonus. I think, in most cases, I would definitely go for the Mega Blast, but then again, when you see it for the first 6 floors, I don't think there's really much more to see there. There's really no engaging experiences, and I think that's also one of the problems of Mega Blast. It's just very samey. You just keep using it. As soon as you enter a floor, you try to get as many charges out of it, then you kind of clear some more rooms, and then you use it again, and you try to avoid enemies and spikes while you're doing it, and sometimes that can be hard. But it's a very samey procedure, and you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And for that, maybe for variety, I decided, we still have quite a fun tier run. I might as well stick with that. I'll take the shovel to maybe have an additional floor, and then just kind of turn on my dodging abilities, because previously you don't really have to think, you just use the item and that's it. But now at least we have to think what we're gonna do and start dodging enemies and not walk into red poops too often if you want to actually have a good score at the end. You can see that overall, this run was a doozy. Obviously when you have some just starting items, and in this case we didn't really lose anything. There were still treasure rooms and shops available, and some dailies of course do take your treasure rooms away if you start really strong, but maybe the developers didn't consider this a really strong start, which I would agree. Friendly Ball and Chanters just isn't that good in its own, but then again, they do like to go for challenges sometimes, so maybe you would expect that they would include that include, I guess, not include the treasure rooms, but it didn't. They were in this daily, and because we did have this nice assortment of items, we were able to make it work. With that said, we also had the Incubus, or maybe later on we got the Incubus with Parasite Shot. We also had the Creep Shots, the green thingy which leaves the green spots on the ground. The color of the thirst is just putrid, it's that poopy green color, which I think is universally unliked. It's that brown weird color which just looks bad. And I'm talking about poopy green in a game like Isaac. You might think that it fits, but I don't really think it fits. The colors of Isaac are in general pretty bright or vibrant, I think. So having these greens or maybe very, very weird tinted brown colors just makes it offset by a little bit. It's also kind of offset by the fact that the green creep on the ground is just so green and so vibrant. It makes it look really weird in my opinion, but besides that, it's a really fun effect. So whenever we shoot, the shots split, and because we have penetrative shots, they usually split at the end of the room, and then we create more creep shots at the start. So you can see that as soon as an enemy spawns, or maybe multiple enemies spawn, we just kind of shoot through them, and there's just a bunch of creep on the ground, and we're just killing every enemy in the room. With the Algiz rune, of course, just Satan. I made that mistake twice again, I think. Satan isn't really a problem. We just run into them with our cube of meat, and he's done in like 10 seconds. That's really it there was to it. It wasn't a very particular run, wasn't a very strategic run. It was just mostly us having fun, and I think that's also good sometimes. In this case, it's Valentine's Day, so I'm glad that the game went easy on us. Our overall score was 16th, which I think is after the cheaters in the top 10, which was my goal I set out yesterday. I did say I wanted to have some more top 10 scores, and this was a top 10 score, which made me happy, excited to some extent, even though maybe I don't sound like it, but that's probably just because I'm tired at this point. Rush bonus, we did the rush, that's great. Our damage penalty was relatively low, which is always something to be proud of, and overall I would just say that this was a very, very solid run. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.